Hello and welcome to Sharing the Sun, Solar Solutions for Landlords and Tenants. I'm Elizabeth Youngblood. I'm a Senior Program Manager at the Mass Clean Energy Center, and we're really happy to have you with us today to talk through these Solar Resource Toolkit opportunities for residential landlords. So just a couple pieces of housekeeping. All participants will be muted during the webinar. If you have any questions, you can enter them into the panel to the right of your screen, and we will be able to see them and talk to them as part of the question and answer session. We will also be recording this webinar, and we'll make it available on our Mass EC YouTube page. And we will send an email link, likely sometime next week, to participants with a link to the webinar as well as a PDF of the slides. So you'll have access to what was said and will be available to you in the near future. So the speakers today are going to be myself, giving a brief introduction, Doug Quattrochi, who's Executive Director of Mass Landlords, Sam Milton, who is our consultant for this project, who's a Principal for Climate Resources Group, and Ben Mayer, who is Vice President of Marketing and Residential Sales at a company called Sunbug Solar, and he'll be talking about his perspective from the field. So to give just a little bit of background on why we created this toolkit, the genesis of it actually started several years ago. In Massachusetts, we've seen a tremendous uptick in adoption of solar over the past 10 years. Back in 2006, there were a couple hundred systems installed in Massachusetts, and maybe about 5 megawatts of capacity. And currently, there are over 90,000 solar PV systems installed across the state, and many of those are residential scale. So that kind of one family, maybe some multifamily, but quite a bit of it is residential solar. However, we've become aware that properties that are owned and managed by landlords face some very unique barriers to adoption. In many cases, landlords, especially of kind of small 1 to 4 family units, don't have a strong understanding of what the value proposition might be for them to install solar, whether they live on site and they live in one of the units, or if they are off-site and are remote. And so we wanted to create these resources to offer kind of a launch pad and opportunity for landlords to learn more. And even though there can be some additional complexities, which we'll speak to a bit today, we thought that there would be a lot of interest. And so we've created these resources for everyone. And so with that, let me pass it over to Doug from Mass Landlords, who can give his perspective on the interest in solar in the landlord industry.
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. Doug here. Mass Landlords is a 501c6 nonprofit trade association for rental property owners and managers in Massachusetts. Our mission is to create better rental housing, particularly by helping owners run profitable, compliant, quality businesses. It's no good if you don't make money because you can't provide housing year after year. You got to follow all the laws, and we want to be proud to be associated with one another. So we offer a variety of services to members, including contributions to this webinar, which we don't own, but we're very grateful to the Clean Energy Center for putting together. So thank you guys. We've got a network of about 60 volunteers and 15 very part-time employees all across the state, and even beyond. We're virtual, so we've got folks helping from everywhere. I think it's important to look at solar in 2 contexts. The first is climate change and the impact on real estate. In particular, if you look at the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration forecasts, they show a 50% chance of at least 10 additional inches in sea level rise by 2050. In other words, over the next 30-year mortgage. Stack that onto a 6-foot storm surge, and you can see that parts of Cambridge and Boston, to pick on 2 examples, really ought to be behind levees, or owners there ought to have flood insurance. And we know that based on studies in New Jersey and down south further, Florida especially, and in the Virginia, Carolinas area, that part of the coast, every $5,000 in flood insurance premium you have is going to decrease your appraised value or your resale value on your real estate by about 100 grand. So we're seeing significant hits from flood risk, coastal areas. And if you think about Pioneer Valley and Springfield, which you imagine is very far from the ocean, you actually have a lot of flood risk there too because of the river. So the Commonwealth actually has projections for how much real estate and equipment damage is going to be cost caused by flooding over that same time period. And their estimates at over $400 billion. So a huge headwind we haven't faced in real estate ever, really. And it's not hopeless. I mean, because although sea level change is not really within Massachusetts' control, Massachusetts is a leader in greenhouse gas reductions, and we're below 1990 levels. We're 20% below 1990 levels, actually. But we need structural change, and we need to just completely eliminate fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions in housing and in transportation in the Commonwealth. So there's that context. Even if you're not concerned with coastal real estate or whatever, it's important to think about solar because it is one of the primary business opportunities for landlords at the moment. In Massachusetts, it's very tightly regulated what we can do with zoning and property, and it's really hard to add new units. So if you wanted to get another $1,000 a month of rental income on a property, you have to get zoning permission to add another apartment or to subdivide it or build out or something. And a lot of times that permission is not granted. And if you focus on cosmetic upgrades, like I'll make this apartment really nice, you're going to potentially push yourself through the top of the market for your neighborhood. So now nobody who wants to live there is going to be able to afford the rents you're asking. So the competition in Massachusetts really, whether or not you realize it, has been on heating costs for a long while now. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the average household energy consumption for Massachusetts specifically is over $200 a month. And we know from talking to folks that some households, leaky households with electric baseboard heat, those renters are paying $600 a month in winter for utility bills. The move. If your building is not properly insulated and sealed, your renters are not going to stay as long. You're going to have higher turnover costs. And here's where it gets interesting from the point of view of the webinar. There are about 70,000 small rental property owners in Massachusetts, and there are about 100 of us registered for this call, going to listen to the recording after or here now. So the question for you is, can you provide comfortable, well-heated rental premises at a structural cost advantage to other owners? So Mass Landlords is a cooperative nonprofit. We're trying to help each other, but ultimately we're all somewhat in competition for the best renters. So there are really three enabling technologies that are going to let you do that. The first of those is insulation air sealing. And in particular now, it's possible to retrofit old buildings, 3-deckers and 4 units and so on, with blow-in insulation and spray foam in a way that won't settle and will be an enduring thermal barrier for your building. And thanks to MassSave now, you can get 90% off, 90% off the cost of that. So if you're not aware of the insulation and air sealing opportunities for MassSave, you need to look at that. The second of the three enabling technologies is solar. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's incentivized very heavily in Massachusetts. So if you're thinking about solar elsewhere in the country, you're going to have to put up more at more cost potentially than you would in Massachusetts in particular, especially with our credit programs where they are. And the third enabling technology is heat pumps. And this is where it really gets interesting from a landlord perspective. These are basically air conditioners that run backwards and can heat buildings. And now, for the first time ever, they're cold rated for Massachusetts, so they can heat even on the coldest days outside. And just as of a year and a half ago, they became cheaper on a per BTU basis than natural gas. So I think those three things have really changed the dynamic for folks who are thinking about their business long-term and proactively. It's at the point where if you're going to build something new, you wouldn't have a chimney in your building. You wouldn't even have gas lines. You would install these three technologies from the start and you'd provide your heat that way. And you would do it for cheaper than any other landlord out there. I'll just make a note that Berkeley, California, just this summer became the first municipality to ban gas lines in new structures. And you've also got to worry in Massachusetts about carbon tax. We've been talking about it for a long time. At some point, there's going to be some kind of policy disincentive to burn fossil fuels, and you can bet that landlords are going to be the ones to pay it directly. If you've got long-term leases, you may not be able to pass that cost through to your renters. So the basic idea for landlords is that you can work to provide heat and electricity for basically zero marginal cost because sunlight is free. And your competitors in the business are going to be operating with leakier buildings, and they're going to be paying for fuel, or the renters are going to be paying for fuel. and they're going to have a hard time competing. So in this call, we're going to focus on photovoltaics and the particular electricity discussion so that we can kind of get basic grounding for how solar works. And then if you want more specific details about charging for this and monetizing it, you can search masslandlords.net for the article, Can a Landlord Charge for Solar? We walk you through what we've seen from others, and we've kind of just shared all the best practices we know of. So I hope that tees up the context and the business motivation for this. And I think with that, I'll turn it over back to our Clean Energy Center here to walk us through how this stuff will work, at least for the solar panel part of it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Doug. And I also wanted to recommend the document that you mentioned. I think it's a great read for landlords and very much complements these resources as well. So next we're going to be speaking with Sam Milton, who is the lead on developing these resources, and Sam is going to walk us through the documents.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Doug, for that great context. I think you're absolutely right that for landlords in Massachusetts, it really behooves them to be thinking about how they can have position themselves really best for kind of a carbon-constrained future. And also put themselves in the best position to be helping their tenants kind of really embrace technologies and kind of reduce their fossil fuel use. So with that really was kind of one of the catalysts of this study. And Elizabeth mentioned the state for many years has been thinking about how to really help improve access to technologies for clean energy to residents and businesses in the Commonwealth. And has found that renters really are one of those missing groups that haven't really been fully able to realize the benefits of solar power. So with that, the CEC brought us on to help develop a toolkit for educating landlords around how to best share the sun, if you will, and bring those renters to the table here. So we developed this really neat toolkit here, which is comprised of a few documents. One is this overview guidance document, which presents some high-level benefits and some steps to really begin to explore solar. In addition to some guidance for landlords that are on-site as well as off-site. And then we also developed some case studies to help illustrate some of the examples that landlords may be experiencing out there. So we began our effort a few months ago, maybe a year or so ago, we're going to collect information about what are the needs of landlords out there and renters as it pertains to solar power. I had the great pleasure of attending a couple of the Mass Landlords events, and it was really clear to me by the fact that the attendees were on the edge of their seats listening to presentations about solar. This is like an urgent need and something that I think people really want to get more information about. And we did our own research as well and found some really interesting facts about the industry in Massachusetts and kind of where solar is. Just a couple of factoids I want to share is that 94% of solar in Massachusetts is on residential buildings. So there's most of the installations are for households. And in terms of the renter stock, 38% of the housing units in Massachusetts are actually occupied by tenants, which is wow. We found that to be an amazingly high number. It just goes to show how big an opportunity this is for landlords and for solar providers to really get the technology in the hands of this new and relatively untapped constituency. And on top of that, about 80% of housing is in kind of 1 to 4 family, multifamily units, which again is a pretty shocking fact that demonstrates further kind of what the opportunity here is. So our initiative and our motivation was really to demystify solar for landlords and how do you best share the benefits of solar with tenants. So to that end, we wanted to make sure that the folks had kind of a good kind of a high level approach to it without getting too much into the weeds. And some of the steps that we brought people to that we're sharing in this document, which Liz will provide a link to at the end, is really thinking there are lots of resources out there. So first, we recommend that that folks interested in pursuing solar review the guidebooks and materials already on the CEC website. There's fantastic resources. Again, the Mass CEC has been at this for a number of years and has developed great materials for folks to understand better, how they approach solar. What are the technical requirements, and how can they begin to think about if their property is right for solar. After having reviewed those materials, we recommend that you reach out to installers. We recommend at least 3 installers to reach out to. Energy Sage is a Massachusetts company that I think got its start here at Mass CEC that can really be helpful in terms of giving shoppers some names of installers to reach out to that can help them kind of walk through the process. And the third step is what we recommend is that that you assess the feasibility of solar on your property. Again, this is something that the installer can help you do. They'll come out and visit, look at the solar resources on your roof and see if it makes sense. They'll give you a feel for kind of whether or not your rooftop is equipped for solar, and kind of what parameters you need to consider as you do it, and if it makes sense or not. And then the next step is think about where are, as a landlord, do you live on the property? Are you off the property? That for sure. But then you think about how do you want to meter the solar system to your building. And I'll get to that a little bit in terms of how we've divided the benefits of solar and kind of how do you share those. So it really is a function of effectively who owns the solar power at the outset, and depending on on who gets those credits, then kind of how you share those becomes kind of a function of kind of the original kind of metering arrangement. So think about the metering, and then you just do the financial analysis, and this goes beyond just sharing the solar benefits with your tenants, but really thinking about how do you finance system? Do you own it? Do you lease it? And there's a great resource that Sunny Cambridge has put together, which is a rent increase methodology, which I think Zapotec helped to develop. It's a great resource, and we have a link to that on the second page of this document. We put together 2 specific documents for different landlord types, so to speak, if you live on-site or if you live off-site. And we broke down 2 scenarios for each of those. So this screen here shows the front and back of our on-site landlord solar guide. And there are two scenarios that we put here. One is really if you connect the system to a landlord utility meter, and others if you connect to a common utility meter. So just again, this all gets to who owns the solar credits at the outset, really for connecting to a landlord utility meter is kind of the most common way. I think we usually see it. You'll have somebody in a triple decker, for example, that is a landlord, has a rental unit, and wants to go solar, and they'll have solar installed on their property. And they'll tie it into their own meter, and then a lot of times after the fact, they'll kind of wonder how to share that with their tenants. Just because this is the most common way to do it, we wanted to make sure that folks understood what those options are, and really that gives landlords a lot of flexibility about how to do it. There may not always be enough solar power credits to go around. But in order to share the solar credits with landlords, you're going to have to do some true up with your tenants, and and find a way to share that kind of with by increasing the rent, or perhaps by offering other ways for the tenants to participate in that. Another scenario is using common meter. So for common meter, this is where there is a second meter or a third meter on the property, which is basically used to operate lights, in the common space. Very often there's, relatively little power that is actually consumed through the common meter, so there'll be some credits. And when those excess credits appear, it'll be the responsibility of the landlord to then kind of divide those up. And one way to do that is through kind of a net metering scenario, which is where you can basically share those credits with another meter, another customer. You can divide those up as you see fit, and that's a good way to always effectively guarantee there'll be some excess power to share. Whereas if it's with the landlord meter directly, there may not always be an excess. So we also developed this Offsite Landlord Solar Guide, which helps folks again who are living off the site to figure out how to best approach this. So again, you can install to a tenant meter, an actual units meter, or to a common meter. To the tenant meter, we found that to be kind of a really compelling idea, because effectively the tenant then they own the power, and they're getting their power bill kind of reduced as a result of their solar production. So in this instance, it really creates an opportunity for the landlord to raise the rent a little bit in exchange for the reduced electricity bills. And you can also provide kind of utilities included in that as well. And some of our case studies that we found, that has been an option that has been fairly attractive for some folks. Again, you can install to the common meter, and this is kind of the same sort of scenario with the onsite tenant, onsite landlord rather. And it's really a straightforward option if you want to share the electricity costs with multiple utility accounts, again through the magic of virtual net metering. And then we produced these 3 case studies looking at a meter that was connected through to a landlord meter, and also to an offsite tenant connected to a tenant meter, and then to a common meter. So each of these are some examples that we pulled out from our work and our kind of interviewing different folks around the Commonwealth who've actually gone through and had these experiences. And we won't go into them right now too much, but I will allow Ben to let us share about some of these experiences and how it relates to some of these specific or types of studies. And I'm sure, in fact, I know, for example, that Sunbug was involved in the case study connecting to the common meter of our offset landlord. So with that, I think I will pass it over to Ben. He can describe some of his work as the Vice President of Marketing and Regional Sales at Sunbug Solar. Can let us know kind of how he's approached these issues and kind of what are some of the guidance that he has to recommend for landlords out there.
Thank you, Sam. So Sunbug Solar is a solar company located we have 2 offices, one in Eastern Mass and one in Western Mass. We've been around for about 10 years, which means that we've been doing solar under lots of different rules and regulations and incentive programs that have changed over time. There were definitely times in Sunbug's 10-year history where I would get a nice call from a nice landlord, and I would say, sorry, I really don't have a good solution for you. But over time in the Commonwealth, various rules and regulations and incentives have changed, and the Mass CEC has put a lot of effort toward promoting solar on multifamily homes, which is really, really important to Sam's point about the number of multifamily properties that we have in Massachusetts. If we're going to get to good PV penetration, we have to figure out how to do this on things other than suburban single-family homes with perfectly southern-facing roofs. So the perspective I want to offer, mostly in the Q&A, is just the perspective of an installer and what happens if you decide you're interested in looking at solar and you would reach out to a series of installers, and one of them was us. We would have a bunch of questions for you that we'd want you to come prepared to be able to answer for us. You might not have all the answers, but depending on the answers to them, we're going to get to different places in this decision matrix. One thing I would recommend right off the bat is that Sam mentioned reaching out to 3 installers, and I think that's a great idea. One of the things that you really want to do, because there's lots of different kinds of installers, and some are national and some are local, you want to try to find installers that when you ask them, have you done this before, right? Have you done PV for a 2-family home, for a 3-family home, that you get some good answers and good references to that, because the experience behind it is valuable in order to be able to point you in the right direction. But some of the things that we would try to address with you right off the bat is, number one, and these 3 handouts that were created are very good at getting to the heart of electricity monetization, right? Which is important. If you're going to be making solar power, how are you going to turn it into something that's valuable for you? And we're going to need to do that through knowing whether you're on the property, whether it's owner occupied, or if you're an offsite landlord, and then some of the various scenarios we can get into about how to monetize it if you are offsite, whether you raise the rent and include electricity, whether you have a separate deal for electricity for the tenant. Tax incentive considerations. This is the thing that I always say at this point, which is that I'm not a tax professional and I don't offer anybody tax advice. However, I'm asked a lot of questions about tax implications for solar. And a really important one is, what are you when you file your taxes? Are you filing your taxes as an individual family, or as are you filing commercial taxes? Because that will change some of the incentives that may be available to you on the tax side, specifically something called accelerated depreciation, or MACRS. So that's something we're going to ask you about. Net metering. The way that net metering rules work in Massachusetts is there's this kind of little piece of information about it, which has to do with whether the physical configuration on your property is single-phase or 3-phase service. And it changes the cap for your eligibility for net metering. So we're going to want to find out, are you single or 3-phase? Almost everybody is going to be single-phase in the 1 to 4 size unit per building area, but not everybody. Sometimes we find somebody who's 3-phase, and that changes how big a solar array they could install and take advantage of 1-to-1 net metering. There's another factor involved here, which is that there's a strange rule in Massachusetts that was designed to prevent large-scale developers from gaming the system by installing a megawatt array and claiming it was really 110 kilowatt arrays, splitting it up for a smaller incentive. And it's called the single parcel rule. And that is that there can only be 1 net meter on a single parcel. And that has been a longstanding rule that we're working on getting changed, and we made some progress with it recently. Now you can have more than 1 net meter on a single parcel as long as it doesn't exceed 10 kW AC capacity. So that's one of the things that we're going to ask you is, A, we're going to look and see whether your roof could have more solar, but B, we're also going to try to figure out, are we doing this project now, but in the future we're going to want to try to do another one? Well, that's going to play under the single parcel rule. And then finally, another thing that Sam got to, which is commonly called virtual net metering, which is, can credits from, well, not can, but they can be sent from one account to another. And so the question of, should we be interconnecting to an individual unit account, or should we be connecting to a common meter if there is a common meter on the property? A lot of smaller properties don't have common meters. And if it's a good setup for you, we might recommend that part of what you upgrade to is having a common meter on the property, which would also allow you to put certain common things onto that, such as the laundry in the basement if it's there, or the driveway lights, or various things that most people might actually want to have on a common meter anyway. So those are kind of just some of the things that if you get into it where you're calling installers and you're asking them about it, you should be prepared to answer some of these questions.
Great. Thanks, Ben. That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there's a lot of these questions that people have that kind of make the idea of solar complex can be addressed by just having good conversations with knowledgeable installers.
Yeah, you have to. This situation is very specific to what you're doing on your property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to the point about these questions, one of the things that we discovered really was where does the landlord live?
Yep.
And how is the metering really set up? Is like this big thing that determines how you arrange the sharing with your tenants. And again, getting into the net metering phase and kind of into how you actually arrange that kind of with utilities also becomes complicated, and that's kind of where you guys can really help demystify this stuff.
Great. Yeah, and I'll also throw in there that installers are really there to help walk you through a lot of the aspects of installing solar. As you're getting bids and things like that, they've especially as Ben mentioned, asking installers that have they done this before, and really kind of learning from their experience and saying, okay, here are a couple different configurations. Here are the benefits of one. Here are the benefits of the other. And really just getting a sense of what that value proposition is when deciding what makes sense for you and your property. Great. So I'm just going to go over a few of the resources that were mentioned. As this webinar is talking about the Solar Resource Toolkit for Residential Landlords called Sharing the Sun, Solar Solutions for Landlords and Tenants. It's a toolkit that's on our website. So you should have a copy of that. Also linked here is the Sunny Cambridge rent increase methodology. That's one method by which to see value for installing solar. There is also quite a few resources. We have one web page that's focused on kind of residential solar resources and a separate web page for commercial solar resources. Although there may be a few specific resources for landlords that are applicable on the commercial solar page, I would recommend, because many of these properties are kind of residential scale, the roofing and things like that, to really first start with the residential solar resources. And this is just a picture of what that front page looks like. A couple of things to just be aware of. One, we have a really amazing resource called the Residential Guide to Solar Electricity. There's information in there about the whole process of going solar, more information about net metering, the incentives that are out there. Also, there's a pretty big section on battery storage if you want to learn about that, and a section on buying and selling a home with solar. And that's actually another potential value stream, is that if you own the solar on the property, it can increase the value of that property. So greatly recommend taking a look at the residential guide. A couple other things on this webpage. There is a Finding Installer resource on there, as well as something called Cost and Performance. And so one thing at Mass CEC is that we track and monitor the vast majority of solar PV systems in the state. And so on this page, there is a widget or a tool that provides information on residential scale solar pricing, number of systems that have been installed in a various town or county, so you can get a good sense of who's been installing in what area and when. So it's over, some of the earliest systems are from 2001. Obviously, there's a huge uptick in the last few years, but definitely take a look there and take a look at this web page. So definitely recommend this as a good kind of first step of exploring and taking advantage of these free resources. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Great. All right, so we're going to move on to the question and answer section. So feel free to add your questions above. I see that we already have a few in here. So I'm just going to start off. First question for Ben is, what would be a reason why someone would want to connect a solar PV system to a common meter versus a landlord meter or a tenant meter?
Yeah. So The first thing that connecting your array to a common meter does is offer you flexibility. If you have a situation where people move out or people change the amount of electricity that they're using, let's say we'll use an example of a two-family in which the landlord lives on site and there's a tenant unit. Over time, people might use different amounts of electricity. You might have a different relationship with that tenant. If we've connected the solar system to the common meter, then changing the value stream is as simple as filing paperwork with the utility. It's something called a Schedule Z, as in zebra. What you can do every 6 months as the owner of a solar array is you can file paperwork with the utility that says, hey, send 50% of the excess credit to meter number XXXXX and 50% to YYYYY. When a relationship changes on the property, somebody moves out, somebody's using more or less, you can always go back and refile that every 6 months and say, okay, 75% to this one, 25% to that one. So a really good reason to install a common meter and to connect to a common meter is to have flexibility down the line. If you think about it, if we build a system and we install it to one meter, and we don't have the ability to change that, and it's going directly to that meter only, then that's going to require physical reconfiguration in the future for stuff, and that's something you want to avoid if you could do it virtually.
But there's a cost to installing a common meter, is that right?
Yeah.
Is actually install cost and also an ongoing cost to the utility?
Yeah.
People find that's worth it still?
It totally depends.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get into this decision matrix. Generally, the utility the cost of installing a common is about $2,400 to $3,000, but in some cases you can't even do it because it's an underground in the original, and that would make it cost prohibitive. So it really depends on the situation and whether, okay, well, when you tag $2,400 onto this project, what does that do to the value stream? What does that do to the payback? What does that do to the overall project viability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. There's a follow-on question here related to the common meter, but I think it's probably applicable to any meter. If you have net metering credits, do those credits have to go to someone else within the building, or can it go to another property? And I'm happy to take this one on, and I've got some people here to fact check me if that's incorrect. So if you have net metering credits, let's say the system is producing more electricity in a given month than is consumed on that meter, you will have a dollar credit on the electric bill that you can, as Ben mentioned, virtually net meter using Schedule Z to other accounts. Those accounts do not need to be in the same building. They can be off-site. They just need to be in the same utility and same load zone, which are fairly large. So if so likely if you live in the same town, or if you live in, perhaps even in the same county, you might be in a good place, but an installer could certainly help you, or you could even go online and, if you have a separate property that's in that same load, in the same utility and load zone, then that is not a problem. You can actually virtually net meter those excess credits to a different site. Yeah,
the big flag there is when you're looking at it, just make sure that you're the same utility, right? If where you want to send it is National Grid and you're an Eversource, then that's a no-go. Then, if it is the same utility, you want to check to see if it's in the same load zone. And for instance, Eversource, there aren't that many load zones, so it probably is. But you should definitely ask your installer because they can look it up on the load zone map.
Great. There's a couple questions here about the slide deck and the resources. Just to clarify, we will absolutely be sending a copy of the slide deck and the resources out as part of an email update once we've put this up on YouTube. So no worries about that. Okay, taking a look at the questions here. So how can installing solar PV add value to a home? So this is a great question. There have been several studies put out by a national lab called Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And what they found is, and this was alluded to earlier, there's kind of two major ways to buy or to get solar on your home. One is to own a system, and one is to lease or have a kind of third-party owner own that system. And what Lawrence Berkeley had found through doing a number of different studies was that If you own the system yourself, it provides value to the property. And if you don't own the system, their study had found that there was no added value. And in fact, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have said, it's actually considered personal property. It's something that, is not owned by you, and so it's something that cannot add value to the home. So the U.S. Department of Energy has actually put some funding into both trainings for appraisers on how to best value homes with solar. And in addition to that, they have something called the PV Value Tool, which is a resource. It's available online, but it's something that appraisers can use to clarify what that value is. So if the system was installed a year ago and it has 20 years to go, you can figure out the value. If it's a 10-year-old system, it will figure out the value from that point. Obviously, some of the value of the system has depreciated because it's already produced so much power, and these systems tend to last for oftentimes the equipment warranties are around 20 years or so. So the answer is yes. Generally, these do show that they add value to your home, which is another potential value stream if you intend to sell.
To follow up on that, Elizabeth, at Sunbug we use a third-party company called Pearl, which is an entity that invented a certification system for energy efficiency measures that are installed on a home. And all of the systems that we install, we get certified through this entity called Pearl. There are other places that do it, but we really like them, and they deliver a great product. And part of the product that they deliver is a completed AIA form that has all of the data about the PV system that then becomes part of the record of the property, which, to my understanding, I'm not a real estate agent or a mortgage professional, but to my understanding means that real estate agents and mortgage professionals, when this form is created and added to the record for the property, have to factor in the value, the details of the solar system in assessing its value. It essentially can't be ignored because it's now part of the AIA system. So Pearl is one of the entities that can do it, but there are now ways to officially add a solar system as a value stream of record to a property that has to be taken into consideration by the AIA.
And if memory serves, I think that there's a parallel initiative to this to educate real estate agents around how solar improves the property value of the home, right?
Thank you. That is actually another initiative in which Mass DEC has been actively involved. Thank you for plugging our own resource. So yeah, there is also a 2-hour online training called Selling the Sun, and it's a tremendous resource that also speaks a bit to the PV Value Tool, but also working with real estate agents on best practices for buying and selling a home. And actually, we did get that's actually where we received a lot of our information and resources that we put into the residential guide as well. So it was really nice to have that collaboration. So it's available online through Keep Me Certified, and the trainer is Craig Foley. So yeah, thank you for plugging that. So we've got a question here about solar hot water. I'll ask it, but then I'll also kind of expand it to other complementary technologies and how do they work with solar. But the question is, if there is perhaps not sufficient roof space for solar PV, is solar hot water an option? I'll also throw in there, when does it make the most financial sense to install solar hot water, or the most financial sense to install an air source heat pump, for example, or maybe even ground source heat pump, and potentially even either by itself or combining it with solar PV.
Well, I'll talk about the solar part of that a little bit. Even if there is space for PV, you might want to consider solar hot water as a different option depending on the profile of how hot water is made on the property. The way that we make hot water in Massachusetts, well, everywhere, but in Massachusetts in particular, is not very efficient or environmentally intelligent. So from a kind of environmental point of view, solar hot water is a really wonderful idea. And from a financial point of view, it can be a great, very strong return on investment because the state of Massachusetts has put a lot of effort into incentivizing it in intelligent ways. so that the cost can be, tax credits, other incentives. Solar thermal RECs are now in play in Massachusetts, which if you talk to a quality solar hot water installer, they can describe them to you. But payback periods for solar hot water can be measured in, as short as 2 or 3 years sometimes. And whether it's a good idea for a landlord on a multifamily property has everything to do with the configuration of the hot water system that you currently have. If it's a shared hot water system in which the tenants are drawing on one hot water production unit is feeding multiple units, solar hot water is almost a no-brainer. I mean, it would make a ton of sense. That's uncommon. Usually you have multiple heating units. But even in the case of multiple heating units, it can often be a great idea. As to your point, Elizabeth, about air source heat pumps, I know there's a huge push in the state about them, and I know that they're very efficient and very cost effective. I'm not a complete expert in the financial dynamics of it.
Yeah, there are some mass save incentives for if you're looking to fuel switch. So I think it was mentioned if you're offsetting high cost heating fuels, that can be where that's kind of the economic sweet spot. So if you're heating with oil or propane or electric baseboard resistance heating, air source heat pump can be a real saver of money, in part because it's much more efficient. It's not creating energy, it's actually transferring it from one to another. It has a kind of, if you think of electric baseboard heating, it's a 1-to-1, 1 unit of energy, 1 unit of heat. Air source heat pump, it's more of a 3-to-1 when it's installed appropriately. Certainly think about that.
Sorry.
Doug, we actually have a question for you here. Did you have anything to add to that previous one?
Yeah, I did. I didn't mean to cut you off, though. Were you finished?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I think the point you're raising, I wanted to emphasize, is really important. A lot of folks think electric heat is a non-starter because they're coming from a baseboard world where 1 unit of energy is 1 unit of heat. But in the heat pump world, 1 unit of energy can move 3 to 5 units of heat, as you said, Elizabeth. And that's really important when you consider maintenance costs. If you go with solar thermal for hot water, you've got to, like Ben said, be careful about your situation because you could end up with a situation where you've got you've got 2 systems now, photovoltaic and solar thermal, and twice as many things to break. Whereas if you currently have separate water meters for each unit, you can go with photovoltaic. You can get those really efficient heat pump water heaters and drive those off of the photovoltaic as well, and then you've got 1 system and only 1 set of things to break. So from a landlord point of view, I think what Ben said, understand where you're coming from with your systems is really important too.
Great, thank you. So this is a question on for you. Do you have any ideas or recommendations on how to increase landlord uptake of mass save offerings and also adding solar PV?
Yeah, so I mean, we've written extensively about this on our site. It has been a tough nut to crack because at a high level, the renter pays for utilities and the landlord's the one being asked to put up the capital. I think Mass Save has done a wonderful thing with this insulation program. The insulation incentives are so staggeringly huge that every landlord should get their properties insulated right away. There will be hoops to jump through, especially when you consider the difference between a market rate renter paying the market rate heat, and then if you've got subsidized renters in the building, you might need to combine funding sources or programs to get that whole building done, but it can be done. So the general roadmap is take care of insulation as soon as you can. That will help in so many ways. And then when you look to the future, you want to start replacing your fuel systems with these electric air source heat pumps, which are very efficient. That will create the electrical load that will really help justify solar panels. So then you get all 3 installed together. And what you're going to see if you look at our site is there's a direct monetization for that, not just cost savings, but you can actually charge oil or fuel type heat included costs for your base rent. So your base rent goes up as if you were charging for oil or gas because that's what people are used to paying, but your marginal cost is 0 because you're powered by the sun. So I think that's really, it's a difficult problem, but when you look at including those items in the rent, there's a lot of legal work that has to be done up to a cap, and you've got to make sure to do the billing correctly and all that. But that's the roadmap.
Excellent, thank you. So there's a question here about property that's located in what's called a municipal light plant territory. This is an area that the municipality owns the electric utility service. So the question is about is net metering available in municipal light plant territories? And the answer is that it really depends. These are not, so there are investor-owned utilities, so Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, and those all offer net metering as an option. If your property is in a municipal light plant territory, it really is up to that entity to clarify what they offer in their town, whether it be net metering or a different structure. And so I would recommend that you reach out directly to your utility and clarify if you're in a municipal light plant territory.
And I just would add to that, it's pretty common because out of 353 municipalities, there are 51 or something towns, Wellesley, Belmont, Concord, a bunch of places that are served by what we call munis, municipal utilities. And they are allowed to make their own rules individually. Now, they try to make good rules and they try to make thoughtful rules, but it's kind of got a Wild West quality to it. So make sure that you reach out to your utility, your municipal utility, and they're technically you own them. They're a municipal not-for-profit entity, right? That's the good part about munis. But also make sure, again, that if you're working with an installer, that installer has worked in that municipal utility, because the chance for a misunderstanding in the rules and regulations compared to what actually happens is pretty high. And so really making sure that you've picked somebody to work with who knows what they're talking about will be very valuable for you.
Great. So we have a kind of a two-part question here. Does this resource toolkit apply to larger buildings greater than 1 to 4 units? I have a 2-family that has been condoized and it has condo association. Could a PV system be installed in the name of the condo association, and can a loan be taken out in the name of the condo association? All right. So I'll speak to the larger than 4 units piece, and we can also talk a bit about condos as well, though that's not directly part of the scope of this set. So knowing that a large number, that kind of 80% of housing in Massachusetts is that kind of 1 to 4 unit property, we really kind of focus this on the 1 to 4 unit space. That being said, certainly there is the opportunity for larger scale, properties to install solar. It probably will be a little bit different and probably maybe even a little bit more complex, depending on some of those kind of net metering rules that were mentioned earlier. So a lot of this is kind of predicated on the idea of getting that one-to-one, value for your net metering credits. But that being said, there definitely are scenarios in which you can install on, a 5-unit or larger site, and then it's just a matter of how do you get that value to the participants. I'll talk to condo associations, and feel free to jump in for anyone else. So there actually is a Department of Energy Resources has a condominium guide that's probably about a 30-page resource document, and I can include that in the list of resources for those. And it gives some additional information and resources focused on kind of condo owners. So there are kind of different scenarios that are applicable to condo associations and condo owners. If you live in Cambridge, the kind of city of Cambridge and Sunny Cambridge is offering a technical resource with Zapotec still to kind of answer questions and things like that as well. So I can certainly send around that resource. Does anyone else have anything in addition to?
I would just say that is one of the most asked questions that we get at Sunbug. We get a lot of condo owners calling us, and the first decision matrix is how many units, right? Is it kind of basically a 2 or 3 family, or is it a big complicated one? Again, if it's a smaller one, a lot of the information in this presentation applies. It really comes down to the fact that when you own a condo, you own from studs in. So your roof is not owned directly by any one condo person, it's owned by the association. And consequently, you have to amend your condo doc saying, oh, unit 1 is allowed to have an array on the roof and have it interconnected to theirs, or unit 2 is, or it's allowed to go to the common, and what the rules are for distributing the benefit of it. Totally doable, totally possible. It's not even particularly difficult. It just adds a layer of complexity.
So I know we're getting a little bit close to the end of the webinar here. We do have a handful of additional questions, many of which I can certainly follow up on separately or individually. There's a couple more questions on where to get the resources, and as I mentioned, certainly I'm happy to include any that I had just mentioned that were not on this PowerPoint slide about the condominium resource, the Selling the Sun real estate agent training, anything like that I'm happy to include. So we will be putting out the slide deck as well as a copy or a link to this webinar likely sometime next week. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining today and participating on this webinar. Please feel free to spread the word if you know of other landlords who might be interested. We would love for this resource to really get out there and to be a real tool for landlords who are considering solar as a viable option for their project and for their property. So thank you very much, and look forward to being in contact.